We are good.
Okay, thanks, Will. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to call the meeting to order at 5:01. Has there been a declaration of public notice?
Yes, there has.
All right, our discussion item today is the School Resource Officer Program, and I'm going to let Dan take over from here.
Great, thank you, Lorraine. Okay, just a quick summary of where we're at and the purpose of tonight's meeting. So at our last regular meeting on July 14th, you heard a report from our internal steering committee. And just want to remind the board, again, this was all in the document that was shared, but as we went into the evaluation process, the purpose of the steering committee was to look at our data and really develop a process for a thorough evaluation. And what we concluded at this point was, first of all, this was by no means a complete evaluation. There's so much to it. So our primary objective was to gather data, get feedback from stakeholders, which we did through surveys and focus groups. And then at the end, we did share out reflections of individuals that were part of the steering committee. We know that as far as a thorough and complete evaluation, that's something that is ongoing and a much bigger task than the six of us were capable of doing in a short time period. And so what we've done is shared what we think is really important information to this point moving forward. But I just want to make sure everyone understands that, by no means is it what I would consider complete. So we did in the recommendations give recommendations for next steps, both with continuing the program as is with officers, as well as if we didn't, things that would have to happen. So you heard a lot of information, you heard from us. Tonight is an opportunity for you as board members to have discussion and ask follow-up questions. And we're also very pleased and appreciate that our local chiefs are able to join us as well, that you can ask them questions and they can share their input and insights as well. So with us are Chief Dan Labor from the village of Cottage Grove and Chief Brian Cheney Austin from the city of Monona. So again, we appreciate those folks being with us. And so I think at this point, Lorraine, if it's okay, I'll kind of just turn it back to you with the board to start with discussion or questions.
All right. Are there questions from board members? Susan Manning?
Thank you, Lorraine. I'd like to ask the chiefs just to speak. I saw the summary work that they had done. If we were to continue the program, what are the top 3 things you would do differently? And just have each of them respond to that because of their experience, I think. Would that be okay?
Sure. You want to go first, Brian, so I have time to think?
Says the veteran in the room. Yeah, no, but I'll go first. I will never pass up an opportunity. Well, first of all, let me say thank you. Thanks for having me here. I made a reference to the good Chief Labor being the veteran of the group, and I say so because he's has much longer experience of being chief. So here I am calling myself out as a rookie, but I think what that does is gives me sort of a unique perspective, especially being the new chief in Monona and having sort of an outsider perspective prior to being in this role. And now that I'm an insider and having access to a lot of information that I previously wasn't. So for those of you who do not know, and for the public who might be listening, I came from the City of Madison Police Department. And in my last years as a commander, as a captain of the police department, I served in a general sense as a liaison between the police department and the Madison Metro School District. And a lot of my assignment and job was to really look at school safety and school and making sure that, the police department provided a good resource for the school district in regards to school safety. What that meant was that I was very much involved with obviously the SRO program, but also more so having to do with the school safety plans, emergency action plans, et cetera. And I worked hand in hand with the district and obviously the board in making sure that we did our role in providing a safe environment for schools. So I have the distinct pleasure of being involved in a similar discussion and debates regarding school resource officers in schools, particularly in the Madison School District. And so I just wanted to preface that so you all had a good foundation as to sort of my background. Obviously, sort of as clear of day, and maybe some of you who are vision impaired may not know this or may not know this about me, but I am a person of color. I am an openly gay man. And so I bring that to you because it also brings some perspective in sort of how I operate in life and what I bring in my philosophy as a police chief and in general about what I think about police officers and particularly with this topic, police officers in school. So all of that preface out of the way, Board Member Manning, I hope to answer your question now. So from an outsider who's now an insider, I can tell you that I see the role of an SRO in our schools as being something that falls very much in line with what the Office of Community-Oriented Policing for the United States Department of Justice says. If you bear with me, I think it's very important that I read you sort of the statutory and sort of the guidance definition from COPS, that Community-Oriented Policing Services, because I think it really speaks to what's the role the SRO should play. So if I can, and that's sort of my foundation in my philosophy moving forward and what a SRO should do. So a school resource officer is a career law enforcement officer assigned in a community policing capacity to a local educational agency. That SRO works in collaboration with the schools and community-based organizations to provide a positive and visible presence of law enforcement on school campuses. The SROs have four major roles, and this is what I support. Law enforcement, the SROs address crime and disorder behaviors in and around school campuses, not, and this is my insert here, not status offense, not school-related behavior disorders or actions. I'll continue with the definition here. SROs strive to employ non-punitive techniques when interacting with students using citation and arrest only as a last resort under very narrow circumstances. They also serve as an informal counselor. SROs build relationships with students and act as liaisons to community services for both youth and families. SROs serve as an educator. SROs teach students about crime prevention, safety, drug awareness, conflict resolution, and other topics related to law enforcement and the legal system. And then lastly, SROs serve as emergency managers. They assist in developing and implementing emergency preparedness policies, including comprehensive school safety plans, as I was referring to earlier, and coordinate with first responders in an emergency. They're an integral part of the school threat assessment team as well. What I do differently in answer to your question is I think we really need to look at, well, I don't think, we really need to look at defining more clearly the role of the SRO, particularly the SRO at Monona Grove High School. I have made a commitment to really look at limiting the types of interaction or the types of involvement or type of involvement which our SRO would be inserted to a handful of sort of what we call complaints or types of crimes or criminal behavior. And most of that is due to statutorily things we have to act on as law enforcement officers, and some because I have to do my job as chief to make sure that I'm providing equitable, high quality service to our members of our community, obviously in which students, parents, and teachers are part of that. So let me elaborate a little bit more about that and what I think will be sort of those limited calls for service that the SRO will be involved in. This includes battery offenses. And when I say battery offenses, I'm going to highlight that it includes reckless endangering level type battery offenses. So we're thinking of significant battery offenses that involve likely some, significant medical issues that go beyond what I would categorize as a simple lunchroom school fight, right? So you're talking about things that rise to the level in which somebody has recklessly endangered the life of another. I believe, and I think that this needs to be the case, that simple assaults can be handled and should be handled by the school administration. Weapons offenses, the SRO will be involved, in my belief, in weapons offenses in which are likely to have created or to cause harm to a student, faculty member, visitor, or parent at the school. A bomb threat or an arson case where that's likely, again, to cause mass casualty or harm to the school. Victim-driven sexual assault complaints. We have a mandatory obligation to report, just as many of you educators, these crimes to Child Protective Services. This is something that this next item is something that I believe we have a duty to investigate, and that is a hate crime. So any related offense that involves a hate crime enhancer or a hate crime attachment, I believe the SRO plays a role, not the principal role necessarily, but does play a role in assisting with that investigation from a law enforcement lens. The additional events in which the SRO would be involved in are child abuse events, because due to our obligations of being mandatory reporters, and unlike educators, domestic violence events or investigations, because we are statutorily bound to investigate domestic violence complaints. Those offenses that are repeat offenses or offenses that have traditionally been handled by the school, and the school has, in consultation with the police, have determined that perhaps the best possible next step is to involve law enforcement, and the SRO is taking principal responsibility for that investigation. We will happily do so, but I'm going to say that those should be few and far between. And so moving forward, let me say, looking back, I don't know if that role and those examples of certain behaviors and crimes were necessarily articulated by the police department. And I'm doing so now on the record in public forum, but I think it's important that as we talk about the potential, if this body agrees, and if our Monona City Common Council agrees, to enter into a memorandum of understanding, that maybe some of that language should be codified, that the role of the SRO should be identified, that some of the crimes and investigations that the chief of police has highlighted as being some things that the SRO shall be involved in need to be codified. But I want to underscore this one point. There are certain things that as law enforcement officers, we do have to act, and we're compelled under law to act. But just because we need to be involved doesn't mean that the outcome will be a law enforcement outcome. What I mean by that is that just because there's something of criminal nature that rises to the level of a police or SRO involvement, it doesn't necessarily need to result in a criminal arrest. It doesn't need to result in a citation, nor should it, if that is not the best possible resolution for that situation. And so moving forward, something that I think that we will do if the SROs will remain in school is that there will be more a clear defined role with respect to what the involvement that SRO plays. But I do want to make sure that he or she, in our case, he, continues to serve as a resource to students, to faculty, to parents, and the community at large. You know, our SRO in the school is, he's the nexus between the police department and the school. What I mean by that is that there's a lot of good quality information that is shared from what he has been made aware of from our perspective in the police department through calls for service in the community that I think are beneficial to the education of the students. I'll give an example, try to be very generic in this example, but Say there is a ongoing domestic violence situation that is going on in a student's home, and we are privy to that information because of our role in responding to that home. It should be the case that the officer, as much as he's able to share, shares with the educational staff that there are some domestic violence, ongoing domestic violence issues in that student's home. The plan here is that we share and address issues as a sort of holistic approach to try to make sure that the student is best supported both in the community, in which they will have to likely interact with people that look like me in uniform, and that resource in the school. Susan, I can go on and on. I'm probably already taking up a lot more time. Did I somewhat answer your question? It wasn't in a 3-point format, but I tried to really deliver as much as I can in response to that.
I think you did very well. I definitely have 3 points. And again, I thought that was very helpful to fully define the role of the SRO, to make sure that the statutory components are included in that. And again, to look and review at seriously at the current program in light of those points moving forward.
Chief Labor, did you want to share?
Yes, please. I think I've been somewhat hands off during our SRO program at the middle school and the grade schools in Cottage Grove, and initially I wasn't, but in the years as it has gone on, and Jess Helgeland has been our SRO since its inception, and she's done such a good job, and I've received so much positive feedback about what she's doing that I wasn't involved as much as I felt I should have been. And it's not that things were going wrong or I felt things were going wrong, but I focused on a lot of other areas in the village that were of concern. And that would be one thing I would do differently. I would want to be more involved with James and the staff and the admin there and the SRO and just making sure that everything is going well. But I was one of those types of managers in this situation where I everything was going well, so I was hands off and happy as heck that nobody was complaining, and I was getting such good feedback from so many different groups. One other thing that has always been an issue is, what is the SRO's role at the middle school and at the grade schools, and is she supposed to be involved in this type of incident, or what is her role there? And so I think we need to we have an agreement in place, but I think we need something even more detailed that says, in this situation, this is the SRO's role. Something that is detailed and comprehensive so that there's no confusion when a situation arises. Okay, no, the SRO should not be involved in this, or yes, this is a situation that they should be involved in. And the last one that I can think of offhand would have been to get more of our officers, and not necessarily in uniform, but up there with just getting to know these students before, during, and after school, because it's just amazing when we have contact with juveniles in the village, in whatever the situation is. We rely upon her so much to tell us about these families and these children and what's going on with them. And if the officers can develop some more personal relationships like she's done, I think that would be a great help to the rest of the department when she's not around and when they're interacting, so they can be more effective in doing their jobs. Those were my 3 major issues.
Thank you. Are there other questions from board members? Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Lorene. Thanks for being with us today. This is helpful. I have a couple of questions that I've had before, so I'm just gonna ask them. One of the things was I want to just make sure or get a clarification that because when I looked at the 2019 to 2020 incidents that we had in the schools, which is the last data set that we had, which says there were 6 abusive inappropriate language, 1 defiance insubordination, 12 fighting, 3 other behaviors, 2 theft, 10 use possession of drugs, 6 use possession of tobacco, and 1 use possession of weapons. So with those, I find 15 incidences that I think that police would be needed. Those being the fighting, physical aggression, the possession of the weapon, and the theft. Those are that's just what I think. So if we had an SRO in the school, can the school handle those other incidences, specifically some of the tobacco, the drugs, the inappropriate language? I think those should be able to be handled in the school. But if there's a police there, I just want to get some clarification. Does the police officer have to do their duty and job if there is some sort of law that's being violated? Do they have to act on that, or do we have some leeway with the memorandum of understanding? That's my question.
I think some of those incidents you're talking about, more of those incidents probably happened at the high school. So Brian, if you want to answer that, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to address it. And my answer to your question is, it's my belief that the school should be handling those that you've laid out, some of those, not all. And there's this thing called incident command structure. I'm not sure if everyone here has been through that or is familiar, but in essence, we would form what's a unified command. There'd be sort of a shared relationship in which you have 2 bosses, right? You have the law enforcement perspective, and then you have the school admin perspective, and then hopefully we can come to a joint resolution on some of those things in which law enforcement that I've outlined should be involved in or has to be involved in. There might be instances in which the SRO says, you know what, Principal McGrath, unfortunately, this is one of those situations where under law, I have to act. And so this will likely result in X. Let me explain why. Let's come up with and see if I'm missing anything. Let's make sure I have all the pieces of the puzzle together. And then conversely, there may be instances in which Principal McGrath is that person who is ultimately responsible for the outcome of that case, your smoking tobacco case. I don't have any plans for my SRO to be writing any tobacco cases. And if I do, there's going to be a long list as to why that happened to be the case. And it should have Principal McGrath's name all over it as to why it came to that point. My point in explaining that, Board Member Hartz, is that I believe that the vast majority of behaviors that SROs were involved in the data that you're seeing are likely ones that can be resolved by the school. I obviously can't speak for the school and their resources and if they're equipped to deal with that. But from my lens, from my perspective, the overwhelming number of those incidents could be handled and addressed by the school. And that is going to be my expectation, that they shall be. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be involved in the conversation or be there as a consult, but the outcome should be that of school-related, outcome, not citation or arrest.
Lorraine, a quick file. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Could I expand on that?
Yeah.
I just want to add to and I've explained this to Dan and in the committee. We as administrators are bound by policy. And so what I implore the board to do is to look into your policy, because there are policies that state we have to get our SRO involved. It says to include the SRO in any search and seizure. That's just an example of one of them. And so in the policy, it tells us, and so we have to follow that policy and involve the SRO. You see what I'm saying? So on one end, it's when we look at the role and responsibility of the SRO, we also have to look at the policy that governs us, the administrators, and the SRO. because there are some that our hands are tied as administrators as well when we are told that we have to involve the school resource officer. It's written that we have to. It's not that we could, it's we have to include the school resource officer with this. And so when I'm looking at these types of situations, I want to look at the bigger picture in terms of the system as well. Because if we are governed and what we have to do as administrators are by policy, and the policy says we have to do this, even if we say, well, you know, you can do this, like, well, the policy is telling me what I need to do. So the policy needs to change, the language needs to change in order to allow the administration the ability to collaborate about any type of situation or outcome that could potentially come about. You see what I'm saying? And so, and this is something that was brought up within our committee, that when we look back at some of our policies does have a zero tolerance piece to it. And so when we look at those types of things that also could lead to the disproportionate numbers, we need to look at those as well. While we're looking at the SRO program and how we're utilizing it, especially with the outcomes and how we collaborate. And so you look at the middle school and you look at the high school, but again, we also have to look at the policy, and we also have to look at what is the role of the SRO, a flow chart in how they are involved, and the impact that it has. And then we always are evaluating, like we do with our teachers, on how well something is being utilized. How effective is it? And how much impact it's having, and in what way?
I had a follow-up, Lorraine, real quick. So also wondering, in our previous memorandum, I had some points that I was a little concerned about. One of those was investigating and questioning, but you kind of alluded to that a little bit. But about the arrest procedures for students, one of the issues I had is I didn't want a student to be arrested if they're showing up for school and they're in class, as long as it's a non-violent event, or even if there was a warrant. I think of school as a safe place for students, and if they're coming to school, they must be there for a reason. That's where we want them. We certainly don't want a police officer coming into a class that a student is actively attending and arresting them and taking them out of the class. And I was wondering if there's any way to, make that a more private, or I don't know, a different type of process. So otherwise, the whole point is we want our students in school. We don't want them out of school. And if there's a student that did something wrong and they're coming to school and they're getting arrested in the middle of all their friends and in class, that could be a significant problem, especially if it's for something like, drugs or something like that, something which I don't support at all. So. And I know that's part of the policy that we have. And Dan, I did make some suggestions, or that was the memorandum. I did make some suggestions, but it didn't seem like those really got changed too much. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Sure. No, thank you. Great question, Eric. So one of the things, and I think that there's a number of points that, as we move forward, what we landed on when we were trying to put together the MOU for last year. And that, as was mentioned, some of the things we already had in policy and other things that we're silent on, we do need to come to some agreement, And so the way we landed, because we hadn't really, we landed on writing the MOU to basically deferring to our policy, that would give the board that control to write it as you see fit. Of course, there are always exceptions, as was noted about law enforcement officers at some points, have obligations, but things where there is discretion, I would agree that as much as we want to, trust and we know that our staff will use good judgment, the more we have in writing, certainly the better. So for now, the short answer is we can adjust our policies the way that we need to. In the long term, I do think it's best to actually have some of these right in the MOU as well. But I think, to do that, I think it does need to be a collaborative approach that we work together on those.
Thank you, Dan. So what you're saying is that we, as the board, have can make changes to that. We will be able to.
Yeah. And that specific example that you gave right now our principals do have discretion, unless there is an immediate, safety or threat situation. No one goes into a classroom to get a student without a principal's permission. So we do have that control, per policy right now.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for both the chiefs. In the news, right, throughout our country, we hear several instances of people of color having some negative experiences with the police. How can you ensure that our students of color will feel safe and welcome in our schools? And the second question I have is, will the officers have diversity training? And if so, what type of training and how often?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that first. SRO Luke Wunsch, and when I got on board here, obviously one of the things I first looked at was the review of the SRO and what he has been involved in. I've sat down and had conversations just to learn about him, his life, what he brings to the table, why he wanted to do this job, because that's important, right? That's important as to who you put in your schools and some of the the skill set and the values that they bring. SRO Wunsch has had a good deal amount of training as it relates to racial disparities, implicit racial bias, police violence, racism, trauma in the schools. That needs to continue. There needs to be ongoing training, and there needs to be collaborative training where that is not solely geared to law enforcement, although we have a very specific assignment and job. I think that learning with other educators and learning from sort of educators' perspective is also important for the SRO to take part in. I hear what you're saying about the concerns of students of color, some students of color may have. I think we continue to work on that, and how we do that is by making sure that we don't involve ourselves, we as police officers aren't always involved in situations where they were likely to result in citation or arrest. And we try to minimize those circumstances that will involve citation or arrest. Police have, and Chief Labor can speak to this, he's been at this a few more years than I, we have a great deal of discretion in what we do, in how we go about our investigations. And we have, for the most part, a great deal of discretion in the outcome of our investigation. Now, I know in talking to Luke, he has used a lot of his discretion when it comes to the outcomes. I think what I'm planning on doing and trying to do to address some of the concerns is to really put down to paper, and by order of me, the new chief, what types of investigations he shall be involved in, so no discretion, and which ones he shall not be involved in, so no discretion, other than at the request of school administration. Prior to this, he was involved in any situation in which he either came across or, what was likely the case, due to a staff consult or referral. And he will get pretty comfortable with saying, I'm here for you to bounce things off of. I'm happy to help answer questions you might have, but I want to just make sure that under my orders from my chief, this is not my investigation. This does not fit the category of this investigation. I think that more often than not, although I will take ownership of police bias, I will take ownership in unconscious bias. It's a real thing. Implicit bias exists in my profession, but it also exists in yours. And I think that it's important for both of us to acknowledge that, maybe we were relying on police too many times to solve some of the issues and behaviors in our schools. And I can see some rationale as to why that may have been. I think that we need to do a better job of following a flow chart, as James alluded to help prevent a lot of those negative contacts. Instead, I'm trying to do this here as a new police chief, is focusing on good, positive engagement with people. And not that I'm going to change hearts and minds, but I think that having a positive interaction with a police officer will make an impact as well in the young person's lives. You know, I promise I won't go on a autobiography spiel here, but I would not be a cop. I'm a Chicago kid who didn't have a lot of good experiences with police as a kid. I was a latchkey kid, traveled all over the city, had friends all over. I had a lot of negative encounters with police officers, stop and frisk, stop and question, and I was a good kid. I'm not fluffing it. I was a really good kid. But I had these experiences with police and I had this negative perception. It wasn't until I came across a cop who just asked if he can talk to me and had a conversation and wanted to check up on me and made sure he knew that I, knew police were there for him or for me, and made sure I had a couple quarters in my pocket, because that was in the time where you had to, use pay phones back in the day. And that changed my outlook on policing. Now that doesn't apply for everyone, right? Trauma is different with every kid. You folks know that. But I think that limiting the negative encounters that police have, that the SRO has with students, and offering more opportunities. So let's offset that, offering way more opportunities to have good, healthy, positive behaviors. My concern, and then I'll be quiet. My concern is that when you remove that opportunity for an interaction, for a good, positive interaction, there are still police in society, people. We are still out here. We're still doing traffic stops. We're still making contacts. We're still investigating crimes. We're still responding for calls for service. The students will have to live in a world with police officers. It's my goal, both in the community and in our schools, to help really work on making sure that we provide, we avail ourselves as a resource, that we're not always there for punitive reasons, and that folks feel at some point will learn to feel comfortable, or we will do our job in making sure that folks are comfortable in interacting with us and coming to the police when they're needed. Now, we can't solve every case. We won't win every kid, but that's my goal.
As far as, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just had one other quick question. So the diversity training, did you feel that that's a need to have diversity training, Chief Austin?
Yeah, I need it for all my staff, and it needs to be on. Not that they're in dire need, but I need it. We all need it, and it's ongoing. And there's ongoing discussions and dialogue, and there's any opportunity that we can get to afford our staff in law enforcement with that sort of training only makes for a better cop, only makes for a better police department. So in looking at Luke's background, I see that he did, sign up for a lot of these trainings that were not state mandated certified trainings that he had to go to. But these are things that I will continue to encourage, continue to pay for him to go, continue to look for opportunities in which he can attend. But that applies to every single staff member at my PD. But Luke just so happens to have a lot of that in his background in the 2 years that I've looked in his training background. So we're looking to build on that and to continue that, not just check the box and go.
Thank you.
As far as Cottage Grove police officers, Officer Helgeland included, everybody has received and continues to receive diversity, equity, and inclusion training. We have had implicit bias training from Madison Police Department, and we will continue to have that. And it's my understanding from listening to Jess and seeing that she's attended quite a few trainings that staff at GDS are also attending. So it's not like she's not included. When there's training of that nature, she's in there and doing it just like the staff does. As far as making students of color feel more welcome at the school, I think Jess has excelled at that. I had her pull up the 2019-2020 school statistics for her from her logs, which are very detailed. And I think now would be a good time to maybe react to some of the statements I saw in the paper specifically saying students of color disabled are more likely to encounter interactions with the SRO. Evidence suggesting the SRO program is not actively improving relationships with students of color. And then another statement that we didn't see overwhelming evidence of an impact of more students of color reaching out and seeking assistance from the SRO. So this is just for our SRO in the Cottage Grove schools. So students of color initiated contact with the SRO 44 times. White students initiated contact with the SRO 37 times. And as special ed students, 7 times. Unknown students 5 times. So those are way out of proportion to their representation in the schools. So the students of color are reaching out to her. And then staff directed the SRO to act with minority students 27 times. Staff directed SRO to interact with special ed students 25 times. And students placed with SRO, Black and special ed students 12 times. So we had over 120 interactions with the SRO that were initiated either by students or directed or through consultation with staff at GDS. The number of times our SRO has initiated contact with students of color on her own, 5 in that year. So we have 120 incidents where we're directed to or the students themselves interacted with our SRO, and 5 times where our SRO is the person initiating that contact, and 2 of them were in one day for a kid wearing a drug-related sweatshirt of some type. So we are reaching out, and they are reaching out to us. I have also some statements from students that have sent emails to her or contacted her directly. One of them wishing her a happy Mother's Day and just saying that I would not be the person that I am today without you, and I wish you could see how much you mean to me and have the best day ever. Another student, and these are students of color and disabled, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for you all for making my middle school years the best I could have asked for. And then some of the examples where she's interacted off duty with students of color. She said she was off duty and at home when she was called by a student of color on her phone. And he asked if our SRO could pick him up and take him to football practice. She did, in her own personal car, drove him into Madison. So there's a student of color reaching out. And then another one, he would come and spend time, some of his lunch periods with her, and said statements like, I hate cops, but I like you. This same kid saw her driving her patrol car during the summer and called out Officer Jess, and they stopped and chatted for a while. And this was a student that was also referred for drug charges, but she still liked our SRO. And I just have a couple more, but I think it's important for you guys to hear these. She had to physically remove a student of color from school as requested by administration for unsafe behaviors. When the student returned to school after her suspension, the SRO was the only person she wanted to talk to or come to. She said that she felt safe with her. Another student of color calls her second mom when she's at school. Another one was the only person that was able to de-escalate a student of color when her behavior escalated so quickly, she would become assaultive. This has happened several times in the past, and others couldn't talk her down. And so she was involved in these incidents, and our SRO was basically the only person that could calm her down. And then a vast amount of kids that she sees in the summer when she's working, they wave her down and want to talk to her. And there's other examples, but I'm not just going to keep going. I think our SRO, and I don't know Luke that well and his day-to-day activities, but I would assume there's quite a few things that are similar. We are reaching out. We are reaching out to students of color. We're reaching out to all kids, but I think we've done the SRO program has done a very good service to include these children and make them feel welcome there.
Thank you, Chief Labor. I appreciate those examples. Those are great examples. But for those students that may not have fallen into that category, that may not feel welcome, would you make any changes at all to ensure that they do?
In collaboration with staff at the school, sure, I think that'd be a great idea. Let's try to reach everybody and make everybody feel like they're included and they're important and they're valued. I would just encourage staff and the SRO to keep trying. Is there underlying conditions where they may have a tough home life or something occurring outside of school that needs addressing? Maybe that could be looked into also. But all I would say is we want to keep trying and we want to make sure everybody is successful at school.
Thank you. Peter?
First, I want to thank Brian and Dan for being with us today and give us a chance to discuss this and answer our questions and get your perspective on that. I really appreciate that. My first question, though, is for James and Mitch. And Brian, I thought you did a nice job. You sort of laid out 4 areas that you view the job. You know, one is dealing with criminal activity, informal. If I get any of these wrong, jump in here. Criminal activity, informal counselor, educator, and emergency coordinator were essentially the 4 that you gave us with a little discussion. My question to Mitch and James, are the SROs, is that program, how does that relate to those 4 needs? And is those 4, sorry, not needs, but 4 layers of service that Brian enunciated, is that what we're getting? And is that what you see? And do you think that we're getting good service in those 4 areas from the SRO program as it exists today?
Peter, I'll start off by answering that. Just saying that the process that Chief Cheney Austin described, I did go through this process, and what he described in terms of identifying when an officer would be involved and when there would be a police consequence or a legal consequence. At the high school, we're on the same page with wanting those conversations and thinking that that'll help us serve students better with our SRO program here. I have a short experience, especially in person with students here. So I'm gonna let James talk a little bit more to his observations. But in addition, and this is where some of the nuanced conversations I think need to take place so that our SROs know this is something they'd be involved in or not, or what the outcome potentially would be. Drug distribution, was a piece that wasn't mentioned that I would like some dialogue on. If there have been multiple attempts to provide an alternative intervention for a student for behavior that could be put others at risk, what are some of our next steps there? So there are some pieces I think that do need to be dialogued, as well as what's the difference if a police officer external wants to initiate an investigation or come, like somebody questioned here, come to the school wanting to talk to a student because of either an incident, investigation, or potential arrest. Clarifying that so that, again, we're working in partnership and we don't have those conversations taking place at that moment. We have those conversations have already taken place and we're all aware of what the expectations are.
James, do you have any comment?
I do. I echo what Mitch has said, but I also understand that and I said this the last time, we brought an SRO in and we didn't have a system. We didn't even have a clear description of what the school resource officer, like what the position entailed. We didn't have an evaluatory system or process in place. So we didn't have a lot of things in place, and that's prevalent in the data. When you look at the kids or staff and stakeholders, they said, like, I don't know what an SRO does, or yeah, I see them here or there, or they're neutral about them. And so that tells me that there's more work to be done in terms of being clear about what is the role of the SRO, and then being clear about at what point do the SRO get involved in situations, and it goes to that creation of that flow chart. What we learned in this committee is a lot of things. We learned that we have an SRO program functioning without an evaluation, without clear guidelines on what should and shouldn't be done. Like there's some blurred areas on should an SRO be involved in this or shouldn't they? And that leads to not knowing when we involve in SRO or not. What we need to do is be very clear, like Chief Cheney Austin said, on where an SRO should be involved and where we have discretion, and administrative collaboration with the police. This year, there was a great example of that happening with a student, and we were able to come to a great conclusion with a student who was struggling, with a student that was a student of special education, through that collaborative means. And the administrative staff and the police collaborated through that situation. And so it's possible and it can happen, and we can get there. We just need to be clear about how we go about doing that. And we have to look at the policies that may conflict with those things. At the same time, be clear about what we want the SRO to be in the program to be, because we have an opportunity here to break down a huge barrier and utilize skill sets of the entire community, and that includes our school resource officer and our officers in the community. And I think that by looking closely at this, and taking those 4 key areas that Chief Cheney Austin had brought in, as well as the key aspects of our system practices, experiences, and impact data, we could build something great. And that's, in my opinion, what we can do in the middle school.
Another question would be, well, first of all, who is it that selects whom the SRO officer is in the district?
Well, at our police department, it's the police chief, but we do that in collaboration with school officials also. And it's very important for everybody to be on board that we're getting the right person in there, and they have to be obviously interested in the position. It just so happens when Officer Helgelin got selected, she was the only person that put in for this job, and she was super excited to get the job, and still is, frankly. So it's a collaborative process, but it's considered a promotion. You don't get paid more, but you're doing a special job, and you're getting a lot of rewards that a regular patrol officer doesn't.
What do you think are the qualities and qualifications of an officer, necessary of an officer for that position?
Well, at the middle school and grade school level, it's someone that can relate to children and young people and wants to make a difference. There are some police officers that, that's not their primary focus. Their focus is combating crime or writing tickets or, doing medical calls. There's so many things you can specialize in and focus on, but the people that are SROs, they really have to be good with kids, and they have to know how to listen and counsel and care. And that's what I've seen from our SRO since she's been in the schools. It's that ability to really connect with the kids and spend time with them. And she realizes she's not there, and most SROs realize they're not in the school just to provide safety. They're there to help these kids grow and to help staff and make it a better environment for everybody.
Is any of that what you just said in the job description or the contract?
I would have to look at the contract, but I know there's language in there describing the process for the SRO selection.
Right. No, but I'm just getting to the point where you're talking about this personal relationship issue, and to be honest, what the things that I hear, the positive feedback I get about the SRO program is all, and you gave us some yourself. It all talks about personal relationships, and as we heard in this informal counselor role. And the difficulty I have, and that's this, it seems to me that's what everybody talks about and praises the program for. And when I look at our agreement and our contract and so on, and the training requirement, which we don't, have training requirements, I don't see that aspect of it. So if everybody's telling me that's the important part, I think we need to make sure that that's part of the program officially and formally, if we're gonna, move forward with that. If that's the important part, let's do it, and let's say that we're going to do it, and that will give guidance to you and give the guidance to us, and it will help everybody with the program.
Sure, anytime you can put it on paper and have it documented, it will help everybody.
Right. Okay, difficult question now. I've been looking at a lot of the references that have been provided for this, and a lot of research over, around this issue. And one thing that you come down to, if, for example, if you look at the, which is at the Weisburst paper, which is one of the last ones on there, what you can see is that when they look at large populations, and you see this over and over again of students, you see that SROs have a negative impact on low-income students of color. For example, this paper gives you a 12% drop in college attendance. Students of color, low-income students of color, continuing on to college in schools with an SRO. And these are long-term, large number studies. This one is like 2.5 million students they've looked at across all of Texas. And the effects are small, but they appear over and over again, they appear to be significant. So I have to take that as, one study over here or there, maybe it's not real, but I see this over and over again. And so I have to take that as my presumption that that's a real effect. Now, you can also argue, well, Texas or West Virginia or wherever they're looking isn't Wisconsin. But what I need from you as a board member, well, first of all, I'll have to say that those effects are too small, although it's just significant. With our populations of minority students, they're probably too small for us to observe directly in our own population. That doesn't mean they don't happen. That just means that they're lost in the noise of the fact that we have a small number of students. But I need a reassurance that this program doesn't have that impact in our schools. So how can I get that assurance? Because as a board member, I have to have it. Because the research says it's real. So who can tell me what we're doing that might be different from the norm? That might differentiate us, that this was not what's going on in our schools. Can anybody answer that question? I know it's a tough question. Can anybody answer?
I will answer first. I know Brian has a response to this because we discussed it. And I think this, I haven't read the study you've read, but I've read quite a few. And I've seen studies that say it's a very positive impact in schools. And I know several examples just in Wisconsin where having the SRO there, they've stopped school shootings, they've stopped school violence. And, if you were asking a patrol officer to come in off the street and investigate that and stop that school violence, they don't know the kids, they don't know the families, they don't know the staff. So I don't see how.
I'm not asking about violence and security. I'm asking about this impact that the research shows on the outcomes, school outcomes, graduation, specifically graduation rates and attendance of college for students of color in schools with SROs versus schools without SROs. And I understand security. Security is a separate question, right?
I think James has something.
This is, and I don't mean to, this is open to everybody here. Here at the table. This question is open to everybody at this table.
Blunt, Peter.
Yeah.
I am the example.
I'm sorry?
I am the example.
Okay.
I'm the example. We had a school resource officer. I grew up in a village. And if you don't know what a village is, it's similar to like a Native American reservation.
Mhm.
We were homeless. There were many of us. I am an example of this. And I had a great relationship with our school resource officer. And I did get arrested and I did get in trouble. But did I make it? Yes. So I am the example. And um, some things are missing from these types of things. Chief Labor spoke to some of them, but on Thursday last week, I also saw some of it. You know, there may be some things that go on that none of us are aware of in the community. Um, but as an assistant principal, I'm pretty in tune to our community. Some things that may happen, you know, experience of a loss of some sort. Um, and you would be surprised that our students of color in the Cottage Grove community, and I can't speak for all of them, but a large number of them know who our school resource officer is and how to get in contact with them. They usually will contact her when they have any questions. We've broken a barrier there. It's not a fear of the school resource officer or an officer. They go and reach out to her. She will go and drive kids to football practices. These aren't logged in her logs because that's just how she is. And that's what happens when you build these relationships with our kids. You just do because you care and it's out of love. And this type of things, like when you do a research study, you ask specific questions to get a set of data that you follow over time. The question is, what questions are you asking and what data are you looking at? We can take, these national things or these national data research and try to apply them to local decisions and say, okay, this is some of the things that we did, and it compares to contacts with students of color or students of special education. And just because they had a contact, tying that to a negative outcome is inaccurate if we can't say and prove that that was a negative outcome. You see what I'm saying? Like, and that's the piece that I'm trying to get to is our program. And you brought this up too earlier. You said, can we get that in the MOU? I agree. That should be very clearly stated. But there's a lot of things missing in the program that we, all of us here, need to have an active role in shaping. Knowing what we know, how do we move forward with that information and set a great program up for success?
Before I ask my follow-up, James, does anybody else want to weigh in on this question?
Peter, I would just add, we've talked about an internal accountability cycle. So, what data do we want to look at annually? Again, keeping our bias in check, reflecting on our processes each year, looking at disproportionality. Didn't really think to include perhaps graduation rate, GPA, those kinds of things in that data, but based on this, study that you're citing, maybe we expand our data and just look a little more widely. And again, that would be pretty speculative on impact here, I think, based on all the other factors. But to answer your question, would just be that cycle of data review and internal accountability here.
One of the things that, and I envy Chief Labor and his staff that they do that we don't do, I certainly didn't do this at MPD, is just creating data for those good positive contacts that we have. I mean, most of our data is based on crime reports and citation arrests, etc. I can tell you in 20 years, I've never sat down and filled out a form in which I made somebody smile, right? Or in which I helped, get a kid some food, or in which I helped. And if I can combat with that data, I would question sort of, the variables, when you're looking at some of these studies. If I had that data to provide, this research, I think that would be very interesting, Peter, to look at. I don't have all the answers. That's why I'm kind of staying silent and trying to watch what I say too, because I know myself. But I can tell you, to James's point, and I mentioned this earlier, I too am a product of having a good interaction with a cop, and I care about those kids that don't have good interactions, and I care about those kids who are dealing with some very valid trauma. While I'm caring about those kids, I'm also thinking about those kids like me and James who have had positive interactions despite all of those negative ones that allowed us to be who we are today. So I get why you're asking that, Peter. It's a very challenging discussion. So I think you were somewhat challenging your fellow board members too. That's why I was kind of sitting silent here.
I mean, yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I've been very silent, which is not normal for me. So I first want to share that, like, there's a lot of positionality within this, right? So like, as my own identity as a Black female, my experience is vastly different than my brother who's a Black male, especially growing up in Chicago, right? And I come from a family that is full of people, full of law enforcement. I mean, like, and it still didn't matter. Our experiences were very different. I personally never had a negative interaction, but at the same time, growing up, we didn't have SROs in schools. Like, I don't remember going through elementary school having an SRO, and this is Chicago public schools, right? I don't remember having an SRO in middle school. And it wasn't until I came to La Follette for high school, even when I started high school in Illinois, we didn't have SROs, right? It was the systems, of course, there's police around because of the system. But as far as like having an SRO, that was new to me until I came to Madison. And so I think, James's truth, that's his truth, right? Like, that's what he experienced. It's great. But also look at James now, he's assistant principal. You know what I mean? So it's like, we also have these different experiences that build us to the places we are today. And so there's some people who unfortunately do not have the support, or that interaction takes them down to another direction, another path. And so we have to acknowledge that. We can't be ignorant to our own privilege. I'm privileged to be a principal. I'm privileged to be in this space. And I acknowledge my privilege. I had people support me and get me through really hard times. There's times where I probably should not be in this space. However, I have to acknowledge that, right? And so I think what the data tells us is what we can only assume by, not our own personal experiences. Because for me, especially with a husband that's in law enforcement, right? I have a very different lens. But I can't lean into that lens. I have to look at how it's affecting everyone. And then what we need to do as far as our basis, like our committee, we talked about grounding ourselves in the research instead of our own biases, because it's so hard to lean into that. But the reality is we need to focus on, like you said, Peter, even though it's a small number of students, that number can be something that has a deeper impact for life. And what I told the committee is, I'm established. I have my job, I have my degrees, I've made it. So what can we do to help kids, to foster them so that they have opportunity to have a job? If they want to go to college, have a degree, right? Like, every interaction that we have thus far, we have a deep impact to make their trajectory to go a different way. And so I just want us, this council, to be very mindful of that, because, as adults, sometimes we get that lost with our own biases on how we experience things in our lens. But it's not about like, if we like an SRO, if they're a good person, if they interact well, it's truly the system. So like, what can we look at and how we can move the needle forward and progress to ensure that we are truly providing good instruction inside the classroom, safe spaces inside the building, and a good partnership in our communities.
All these other places, Texas, West Virginia, Michigan, North Carolina, where you see these studies come out, it's full of school boards just like us. People who are real well-meaning, full of police chiefs trying to do their best by students, full of administrators trying to do their best, just like us. They're having these same debates and discussions. We're going to make this the best place for students that we can make it. And yet we see this effect in the data that they're not doing it. And I want to make sure, I need to know that we're not going to do it either, that we're going to be more, if you ask me, we have to be more successful than they are. I mean, you know, we have great people here at this table right now, all of us. And there's lots of great people who are trying really hard to do this. And you still see these numbers and you see them over and over again. Not huge effects, but significant effects. And to us, it amounts to one student, right? And so that's going to be lost in the noise. But if you sort of take statistically, it amounts to one student. That's going to be lost in the noise. But we got to be sure, we got to pay attention to it and make sure we do not, you know, even though we're well-meaning, we have to figure out, we have to be better than the data shows the average American school district is doing with this program. We can't be average. We have to be better than that. And it's a difficult question. And I didn't expect, you know, if we knew the solution to this, we wouldn't be sitting here. We wouldn't have this question. This is one of these really difficult, intractable problems that we have in this country, and with different weights and different ways to weigh things, and we haven't quite figured it out. And what I'm looking for is, how are we going to move forward so that we can figure out and we can do better? What's going to differentiate our program? If we're going to have a program, what's going to differentiate our program and make it better? Because these programs need to be better. We can't just have an average program. We need to have a better program.
Thank you. Susan, I do see your hand. I just want to jump in. Peter, I appreciate your question too. I want to say that. My question is for James and Mitch. One of the proposals was instead of having SROs, hiring more mental health professionals to help students. Would that be an option? The other question is unrelated. Students with disabilities. It was indicated in the study as well that students with disabilities were impacted in a negative way. And how will we ensure that our students with disabilities will not have those experiences?
I can go first, Mitch, if you want. I mean, I know you went first the last time. I'll take this one. I'll start off with the how do we make sure that our special ed students are not negatively impacted. That goes back to the system that we set up, that we all in this meeting sets up, will support how an SRO is utilized. Again, Chief Cheney Austin was clear. There needs to be a flow chart and when a school resource officer is involved in something and when they're not. And that needs to be something that needs to be clear. There needs to be a clear description of the role and responsibility of the school resource officer. All of those things will help to impact the data piece of when a school resource officer is, if any time, involved with working with students with disabilities. And so when you ask that question, it's yes, we can impact that, but we all have to impact that when we create the language for the role and responsibility of this program, of this school resource officer. And we have to be intentional about how we utilize that. And then we also have to be intentional about the type of data that we collect from the school resource officer, because as Chief Cheney Austin had said, and Chief Labor had just mentioned, unless they are telling you the positive outcomes or things that are going on, we're just logging the negative. And we do that as administrators as well. Anytime we put something in Infinite Campus as an administrator, it's a behavior referral. There is no place to put like a positive, like this kid did an awesome job, you know? And so we have to look at our systems and how we're tracking and monitoring the whole of what a school resource officer provides, more of a holistic view. So that way we can accurately look at what needs to be improved, what training needs to be provided, what more supports need to be given, and where. Speaking to the mental health professionals, when we first brought a school resource officer into the middle school, I had actually asked the director of student services and Dan as well, and he knows, I had asked for a mental health coordinator position. Right now I asked for the similar type thing. And if you look at studies, Minnesota's had a mental health coordinator in their schools. They have a position in their schools, and it has had a positive effect and impact on the schools. And so, yes, I feel like we should have a mental health coordinator in the school. I think that'll be a huge positive for our family and communities. But I think that there's a place for both. There is a place for both. And there is a place where the mental health coordinator can support the families, getting them the resources they need, similar to a program that we do we partner with, which is Building Bridges. It'd be nice to have a person like that in our building to support those families and those students with those needs. At the same token, it would also be nice to have the school resource officer who can build those relationships, use their expertise, and support classrooms and support kids with online, with the increase with online bullying, with the increase of online stuff, with investigations that are outside of our purview that we can't get access to, that they can also provide that expertise as well, and then also support us as a community as we move forward. And so I see it as a team approach that together we can do it better, instead of if this, then only this and not that. Because I've seen the benefits of having at least our school resource officer, when done correctly, when having clear roles, when having clear flow charts of what an SRO would be involved in, and with the administrator being the collaborative point with the SRO and the chiefs with evaluations in place, can be very positive and have positive outcomes. And I've seen the data with regards to having the mental health coordinator. So I'm a big proponent of having mental health coordinators in schools as well.
Thank you, James.
And I'll go ahead and answer that also. With the disproportionate impact on students with disabilities, I think it does go back to consistent practices and clarity on when SROs are involved in incidents. And then a data review to see where we're at in terms of our internal practices and the reflection on that data, and perhaps a root cause analysis then. So I think that's James kind of elaborated on that as well. With the replacement of the SRO with a mental health professional, I certainly don't want to discount the need for mental health in our schools. Just thinking about that and processing it, Chief Cheney Austin started this conversation with four categories that he sees SROs would need to be involved in a school because the school would need that assistance to handle the situation. As I said, I think there are others that could be included in that dialogue. So would the mental health professional be able to operate and assist in those four areas and all the incidents under that umbrella? And I don't see that would be feasible. The other piece, just thinking that through, is, you know, if we were able to add a mental health professional full-time, would we have some assurance that would be a reduction, and what kind of reduction would we see in those four areas where we no longer would need an SRO? And that's difficult to predict, but I don't know that adding a mental health professional would, you know, give us assurance that, okay, we're going to see reduction in those incidents where we absolutely do need an SRO. And so for those reasons, I see it's important for the additional mental health support to our team here, but I don't see where it would replace the SRO.
Thank you, Mitch. Susan Manning.
Thank you very much. I have to say, again, because of my background, I also did extensive research and read the same research. I also reached out and asked law enforcement for any additional research they may have. And what was really interesting was kind of exactly what I've just been hearing. And I hope everybody goes back and listens to the last 10 minutes of this meeting, because what I heard and what my experiences with my children was that this research is very strong and it's very powerful. But to me, it's like healthcare. if you have the right physician who has the right expertise and the right commitment to helping to make people better, the result may very well be different from the prevalent research. And in the last 10 minutes, hearing again very specifically about our programs and the work that our people have done leads me to believe that our program is different from the research results. It also leads me to believe that there is an incredible commitment from administration and support staff from the village and the city to continually improve this program. The last piece is that, Lorraine, I've been advocating for mental health professionals and connections in our schools for now 5 years, and we're making steps. The progress still feels very slow to me, but we are making steps. And having heard the last comments, it sounds, and that's my healthcare background, they're different roles. And we need both of these people in our setting collaboratively working to make our students feel safe and comfortable in their school environment. And I really appreciate the input we've just received and the questions that reveal this input to this board. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Susan Fox? You're on mute, Susan.
I muted on top of it. I was going to say I've had a lot of unstable internet going on here, but I caught most of this. And I also really appreciate the questions and the thoughtful answers. And I guess I think, you know, one thought I always have when I read research like that is, I do think, not that I don't discount it, but there are real differences in school districts and among school boards. I mean, there are a lot of districts and states where they take a very different attitude toward discipline, for example. We've not had an absolute zero tolerance policy, 3 strikes you're out kind of thing here. There are a lot of districts that do. There are districts that are far more ready to expel. So there are a lot of different attitudes on the parts of school boards too. And not that they're not necessarily doing what they think is best, but very different approaches to what our district has historically had, which I think does have an impact on how our SROs function. And I think can have more with, you know, more effort put into being more thoughtful about what the role is. I do think we've not given appropriate guidance in the last several years, and the position has morphed into something that wasn't necessarily intended to. I also agree that I think that a mental health coordinator or professional has a different role than an SRO, and it makes sense to me that there's a place possibly for both. Funding is also a different issue in that mental health professional, I believe, would have to be funded out of our general fund, not, you know, the Fund 80 community fund is different money. So that's another issue with that, which doesn't mean we can't do it. It just means it's a different issue. And I guess the other thought I had is, Chief Cheney Austin, you mentioned the SRO as working with the school and developing a safety plan and being part of a safety committee. And I don't think we really have a functioning committee like that. And this might be a good time to rethink that as well, where like a total school safety committee that would have some student representation, staff, parents, the SROs, in that it could go to, you know, physical safety, health safety, I mean, lots of issues of safety, a broader topic. And that might be another good thing to think about as we move forward with this. It's just another thought I had. And I don't know if you could say any more, Chief Cheney Austin, about what your experience with that kind of committee is in the past. I think you mentioned as a police liaison with Madison that you had some experience with that.
Yes, thank you. And so, yeah, there's a couple different concepts that I'm aware of that are in place. School safety uh, committees do look at sort of infrastructure security, sort of what you were referencing, Member Fox's, you know, health and wellness within schools and how, you know, best to utilize the school resource officer in certain situations. Really, if any of you heard the name of Greg Rossetti, he was a long-term La Follette High School SRO, and I think he may have bounced other places too, but he really started this whole, at least regionally here, I think he was one of the first to start the whole concept of you know, justice referrals in school, and making sure that consequences didn't always need to you know, rest with a citation or arrest, and that there were some other options available. And so, you know, working with Time Bank and Briar Patch and the YWCA to really look at how we can start utilizing some of these referrals in lieu of citation or arrest is, you know, definitely something that I think that both the school board and my police department needs to really start to take a look at. And that is what this school safety committee can start to really chew into. My concern, I'm just going to segue a little bit if I can, Susan. My concern, and I didn't want to start talking about this until the end, and I think we're almost there, but the concern is that there's not been a lot of discussion as to the consequence, intended or otherwise, of removing the SRO from the school. From my 21-person agency, my concern is that I won't be able to provide you with any resource for Monona Grove High School. And what I mean by that is that Walmart, who's a tax-paying entity, I get it, the Beltline crashes, all the other calls for service in the city of Monona will be that resource priority. And you will not have a dedicated resource to somebody who services the kids and adults that work in your facilities, and the time it takes to address some of these very complex problems. You won't have that, and you'll get one of our high quality patrol officers. But mind you, I'm not going to expect them to spend 8 hours on the call. They can't. We just can't. And so that is also my concern. So going back to the school, the committee, there's also a thing called a school traffic plan and school traffic committee. And what that'll look at, that'll involve that SRO and looking at school safety planning as it relates to traffic. And some of that has to do with parking. Let me tell you, in my role here, I see a lot of those concerns and issues and complaints as it relates to Monona Grove High School and parking and how that impacts safety, and Monona Drive and how that impacts safety. And then as you talk about Winnequa School and how that impacts, you know, the traffic there, you know, we really need to come at a sort of joint plan and consensus when we address these school traffic safety plans. And our SRO would be able to be involved in that. If I pull that resource and we no longer have that resource, I don't have anyone to send you as a substitute. And so here again lies my concern is that I think, frankly, that if this is Brian talking, Brian, now Police Chief Brian, I would feel horrible, and that I would be doing a disservice to our kids by not having this added resource and dedicated resource to these students and the faculty and staff and that attend our schools. And so, yes, that SRO would be involved in these these planning committees, Susan, that will help both look at traffic, infrastructure, and health and wellness if they determine that the SRO plays a role in that as well.
Peter?
Question for the chiefs. In line with the fact that this is a community service fund, as Susan mentioned, funded program, do the SROs provide any, you know, while they're on the clock as an SRO, do they provide, while they're being paid by the district, any services to the community outside of the students and staff in the schools?
I'm not sure I understand the
Yeah,
question.
I'm blanking too, Peter. So can you
Well,
elaborate?
the community service fund is a special fund that the school has available that we can use for programs that support, but they have to be open. They have to support the entire community more than just the schools, the definition of the fund. And so when I'm asking what resources the SRO provides to the greater community, for example, students who might be open enrolled to other school districts or in private schools, or anything that the SROs provide to the community at large, rather than specifically in school to the students, programs to the students in our schools and the families and the administration. In other words, is the contact purely school related, or is there a greater community contact?
From my perspective, there is a greater community impact by the SRO. Not only are they active at the school, but they're active in the community when they're interacting with families and working on plans to fix issues. And it's, at least from our perspective in Cottage Grove, the SRO has an impact well outside of the school and has had a very positive impact. And the kids that I deal with and the other officers deal with are super impressed with the SRO and what she's done to impact kids and their families. So I guess she's very dedicated when she's in the class and in the school, providing safety and all of her duties, but the impact outside the school is great too. She's constantly providing counseling to families in the community and working with them to make their kids feel more safe and included and getting a good education.
And with Monona, we have a community resource officer who's separate from patrol. And I know that in my short tenure here, I've seen and know that the two of them work on a lot of projects together that either are related to the school district or are not related to the school district. But in a more informal sense, one of the things I mentioned to SRO Lunch was that, hey, although I appreciate volunteerism and I think that that's a beautiful thing and I need to work on dedicating more of my time, that gentleman spends a lot of time on his own doing sort of stuff that can be clocked. I mean, I should be getting a bigger bill from him, frankly, with a lot of work that he's doing. And I think that speaks to sort of Chief Labor and I's point, and a couple of things that have been brought up earlier is you have to put the right person in these jobs. I mean, it is, to be frank, it's a noble job. It's a challenging job. It isn't the most glamorous position, and it takes the right person to do that role. So I think, Peter, I think there's more sort of more informal work that goes on than formal. So there isn't a booth or one specific community event that's solely targeted to the non-Monona Grove audience that is specifically related to your question. But I know that there is work that goes on a daily basis when Luke is here that doesn't necessarily involve the high school. And I know the two collaborate, between Jess and Luke. They spend a lot of time collaborating with one another and assisting various after school events, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James, I noticed you had your hand. You had a question or comment?
I was just going to expand on that just because I work specifically with Jess in terms of how she is involved with the community. From things like our fun run that we do with our students who run through the community. She sets that up with our officers, and our officers will go and block off streets and communicate that with the families. We were able to in Cottage Grove to communicate the change in the traffic pattern. I don't know if you know, but if you drive out to Cottage Grove, you can't take BB. and that was a big thing because we wanted our families to be aware of those things. Other ways that she's involved with our community can be with how she reaches out to our Dane County Sheriff's Office to set up any type of drills or other things. If we were to have anyone come into the office from Dane County Criminal Investigations, DCI, to work with our health classes, to talk to students about when they're online, how to be safe. All of these are people in the community, that partnerships that we rely on to bring those experts into the classroom to support students who have questions. And so those are just a few of them. I know I can speak to Jess. She coaches volleyball. So when she's done with her day, she'll come in and she'll coach volleyball. So she'll coach with the kids, but she'll also just come in when she's off to see if a kid has a game or something. So all of these things to talk to kids and other things. And really she'll ask, should I wear a uniform or not? And those are the conversations that we have, like, hey, why don't you just come without uniform? Or some kids will be like, you should wear your uniform. It's a pretty formal event. And so when we have an 8th grade recognition, by request, she'll wear her uniform. So these are the collaborative things that go on, and how the community is involved and how she's involved with the community in Cottage Grove that I can speak to.
Thank you, James. It doesn't look like any other board members have questions. I wanted to also give the opportunity to Brianna or Shelby if you had any questions or comments.
Sure, I'll just chime in real quick here. Chief Cheney Austin, I really appreciate you outlining some of those things that you spoke to in the beginning, and really where you see like the vision of the SRO. And I think something to sort of think about as a future, as a board and as a district and as a community, is what does that look like then? Is a daily presence needed? What is really the role, and what does that look like, and how is that outlined? And if there are other resources that we can tap into as well, that'd be great, because our students need as much as we can give them. So, and I truly am concerned about policing in schools and all those things, and some of the things you outlined, I think definitely could negate some of those things, but it is a question that I still grapple with, whether policing in schools is needed versus an educational professional responding to kids in crisis. So I think how we write the MOU really matters going forward, and I'm hoping for a true collaboration, because I don't think that occurred when we started the program. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Shelby. All right. Oh, Peter, you had a question?
Not a question, more of a comment, which is, there is something that Chief Austin mentioned at the end. He lays out his 4 roles for the SRO, and then he gave a 5th one when he was sort of concluding his statements, which he says is nexus of communication, of contact between our community policing and our schools. And to be honest, that's the role that I see as one of, maybe not, I think the personal relationships developed is the most important role. I think the next most important one for our schools is this nexus of communications between, and of this interface between our organizations. And I just wanted to comment that that Brian, if you're going to give that list again, I would consider seriously amending it to add a 5th element, because that strikes me still as the most important thing, one of the most important things that gets done by this. So that's just my comment.
Thank you, Peter. Right. Doesn't appear to be any other more comments. I want to say on behalf of the school board, we want to thank both Cheney Austin and Chief Labor for allowing us to ask questions and having this discussion. I know it's kind of challenging to have a bunch of board members asking you a bunch of questions, but you handled it very well. And we want to say thank you. Also, I want to say thank you to our administrators as well. One, also to being a part of this committee. We know that you took long hours working on this, and so we truly appreciate all the hard work and effort that you put towards this. With that said, can I please have a motion for adjournment?
I'll move adjournment.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion